Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia was born on July 26, 1995, in San Salvador, El Salvador. Sometime around 2011, he illegally entered the United States, crossing from Mexico into Texas. Kilmar then made his way to Maryland, where he lived with his brother, who was a U.S. citizen. In 2016, Kilmar met a woman named Jennifer, and they eventually became romantically involved. He moved in with her in December 2018, and Jennifer learned that she was pregnant with his child. Kilmar worked in construction to support Jennifer and her two children. On March 18, 2019, Kilmar went to a Home Depot parking lot in Hyattsville, Maryland, in order to find work as a day laborer. The police arrived and detained him along with 3 other men who were also looking for work. The police accused Kilmar of being a member of the international criminal gang MS-13. Kilmar denied having membership in the gang. He was turned over to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE. Law enforcement offered a few reasons to the court to support their belief that Kilmar was an MS-13 member. For example, he was wearing a hat containing the logo for the Chicago Bulls, and an informant identified Kilmar as a gang member who was active with a branch based out of Long Island, New York. The court ruled that there was sufficient evidence that Kilmar was in a gang. He was ordered to be held without bond. After Kilmar filed an appeal, the ruling was upheld. On June 25, 2019, while Kilmar was still in custody, he married Jennifer. She gave birth to their son on August 11 of that year. Kilmar continued his effort to be released from custody by applying for asylum and other remedies. His request for asylum was denied because asylum applications must be submitted within 1 year of entering the United States. However, Kilmar had success using another strategy. He applied for a status called withholding of removal, which prevents a person from being deported back to a specified country, but does not prevent them from being sent to a different country. A person granted this status does not gain a path to U.S. citizenship. Kilmar argued for this status, claiming that he would face persecution if he was returned to El Salvador. On October 10, 2019, the court granted him withholding of removal, finding that Kilmar was more likely than not to be persecuted by gangs in El Salvador if he was returned to that country. This victory meant that he could legally remain in the United States. He was released from custody and issued a work permit. In 2021, Kilmar's wife Jennifer filed for a protective order against him. She claimed that he punched her, scratched her, ripped her shirt, and caused bruising on her body. Jennifer failed to attend a hearing, and the case was dismissed. Later, she indicated that she and Kilmar were able to work through their problems with counseling. She had sought the protective order in case the situation escalated, which did not happen. In 2022, Kilmar and 8 other people were in a van on Interstate 40 in Tennessee when the vehicle was pulled over for speeding and veering out of the lane. He told the police that he and his acquaintances were traveling for construction work. The police were suspicious. They did not see any luggage in the vehicle and wondered if they had stumbled upon an instance of human trafficking. The police contacted ICE, but they were not interested in Kilmar and indicated he should not be detained. He was released with a warning for driving with an expired license. No other charges were filed against him. In September 2024, Kilmar became a sheet metal apprentice as he continued to support his family financially. Not long after this, the winds of change swept through Washington with the election of Donald Trump. A promise central to Trump's presidential campaign was to deport illegal immigrants. To this end, the Trump administration made a deal with El Salvador to imprison illegal immigrants in the Terrorism Confinement Center, which is a notorious mega-prison. A symbol of El Salvador's tough-on-crime approach, the prison is known for delivering an unpleasant and substandard incarceration experience. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On March 12, 2025, Kilmar left work at a job site in Baltimore, Maryland, and picked up his 5-year-old son. After this, he was pulled over by a Department of Homeland Security agent and told that his status had changed. He was taken into custody and eventually transported to a detention facility in Texas. On March 15, 2025, 3 days after being pulled over, Kilmar was sent to El Salvador. He was placed in the Terrorism Confinement Center, which he would later report was traumatizing. On March 24, 2025, Kilmar's wife Jennifer filed a lawsuit seeking the return of her husband. The lawsuit asserted that Kilmar had no affiliation with MS-13 or any other gang. He had never been charged or convicted of any criminal offense in the United States, in El Salvador, or in any country. The government acknowledged that Kilmar was deported due to an administrative error. They failed to produce any evidence that Kilmar was a member of MS-13 and appeared to give up on this argument entirely. On April 4, 2025, the court ruled that Kilmar was deported illegally and would suffer irreparable harm if he remained in El Salvador. The judge gave the government until April 7 to ensure his return to the United States. The Trump administration appealed the ruling to the Supreme Court. On April 10, 2025, the Supreme Court found that Kilmar was subject to a withholding order forbidding his removal to El Salvador. Deporting him was illegal. They ordered the government to facilitate his release from custody and to ensure his case was handled as if he had not been improperly sent to El Salvador. 3 days later, the Trump administration said that it interpreted the order to facilitate Kilmar's return as an order to remove any domestic obstacles in the U.S. which would impede his return. They did not believe there was a requirement to actively bring Kilmar back from El Salvador. The Trump administration did not do anything to assist in the return of Kilmar. Donald Trump claimed that he could not facilitate the return because the president of El Salvador had refused to release Kilmar. This seems unusual for Trump, a man who regularly bullies other world leaders. Now, all of a sudden, the president of El Salvador is too tough for him. Many people find this difficult to believe. The Trump administration has made it clear that if Kilmar did somehow get back into the United States, he would be deported again. On April 17, 2025, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland traveled to El Salvador and visited with Kilmar in a hotel. Kilmar told Chris that he had been moved out of the Terrorism Confinement Center on April 9. At the time I'm making this video, Kilmar remains in El Salvador, and the political debate about his deportation rages on. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. The Terrorism Confinement Center was built to manage a severe problem in El Salvador. The nation has a challenging history as far as gang activity. In 2015, it was the most dangerous country in the Western Hemisphere, plagued by violence, drug dealing, and corruption. Gang members were responsible for thousands of murders and had tremendous political influence. In response, the country instituted an aggressive anti-gang strategy and, in 2023, opened the Terrorism Confinement Center. The prison has 8 cell blocks containing 32 cells each, for a total of 256 cells. Each cell is about 980 square feet. They are designed to hold 156 prisoners, which is just over 6 square feet per inmate. Each cell is equipped with 80 metal bunk beds, which are stacked 4 high. This, of course, means there are not enough beds for each prisoner. Those lucky enough to have a bed will sleep on a metal plate. The ceiling is constructed of a sharpened metal grate, which guards look through to monitor activity in the cell. Each cell has 2 toilets, 2 basins, 2 Bibles, and a barrel of drinking water. There is no air conditioning, there are no windows or fans, and temperatures regularly get up near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Inmates remain in their cells for 23.5 hours a day. The half hour out of the cell is spent in a hallway. Inmates never step outside. Other than the Bible, no reading materials are available, not even letters from family members or friends. Prisoners receive meals of rice, beans, eggs, and pasta. Out of fear that inmates will create weapons, they are not given utensils. According to human rights advocates, fatalities in the prison are frequent. Many inmates die from strangulation, beatings, and a lack of medical attention. Prisoners are not permitted any visitors. There are no workshops and no prison education groups. Rehabilitation is not the objective. The prisoners are only expected to suffer and eventually die. The prison is kind of like hell, except with fewer amenities. The Terrorism Confinement Center has never released an inmate, and the government of El Salvador indicated that no inmate would ever be returned to the community. Being admitted to the prison is a one-way trip. Understandably, inmates may lose all hope in their desolate, unforgiving, and permanent home. Item number 2, the deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia has caused a lot of controversy. Not surprisingly, opinions on the case tend to fall along party lines. This brings me to the question, should Kilmar remain in El Salvador, or should he be returned to the United States? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he should remain in El Salvador, starting with the factors supporting this theory. Kilmar entered the United States illegally and should have expected a frosty reception. Many U.S. citizens view it as ridiculous that people are allowed to just stroll into the United States illegally with no penalty and little fear of deportation. This is especially offensive when the illegal immigrants also commit other offenses, like those associated with gang activity. The government never proved that Kilmar was in a gang, but there is some evidence that he is no angel. For example, the incident where he was pulled over in Tennessee and his wife's allegations that he physically mistreated her. It is possible that if he was not accidentally deported, Kilmar would have been deported later anyway. His mistake in deportation may not have changed the end result. Now moving to the factors which contradict the theory that Kilmar should remain in El Salvador. The evidence against Kilmar is insufficient to establish that he was in a gang, and he has never been convicted of a crime. The government admitted that Kilmar was deported by mistake. He never should have been sent to El Salvador. He had obtained a legal status that specifically prohibited sending him to that country. The Supreme Court has ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Kilmar to the United States. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Kilmar should remain in El Salvador? No. He was deported by mistake and should be returned to the United States. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. No matter what he says, Donald Trump could easily convince the president of El Salvador to send Kilmar back. Trump is deliberately resisting the ruling by the Supreme Court. He is testing his power in this instance, not wanting to give even an inch. Instead of respecting the decision of the Supreme Court, the Trump administration is trying to make this about Kilmar's character. They argue that he deserved to be deported, regardless of what the law says. J.D. Vance falsely claimed that Kilmar was a convicted MS-13 gang member, and Donald Trump held up a digitally altered picture showing the characters MS-13 tattooed across Kilmar's knuckles. Allowing Trump to get away with defying the rule of law is a slippery slope, and Trump has made efforts to prove this exact point. For example, he indicated that he'd like to expand the use of foreign prisons to include the incarceration of American citizens. So Trump is just fine with throwing the Constitution completely out the window, like the document does not even exist. If Trump is allowed to get away with deporting an immigrant who had a legal right to be in the U.S., it's just a matter of time before he can deport anyone. Perhaps Trump is counting on this. Now moving to my final item, number 3. What lessons can be learned from this case? I think there are 2 lessons here. The first one is about the dangers of grandiosity, arrogance, the false belief of being special, and the inability to admit a mistake. Trump has made it clear that he has contempt for the rule of law. He is undermining his own immigration policy by fighting to keep someone wrongly deported out of the U.S. The solution to his problem is not complex. All Trump has to do is follow the law. Apparently, this is asking too much. The second lesson is about the dangers of coming to the United States illegally. It doesn't make any sense for people to believe they can enter a country unlawfully and be welcomed with open arms. Kilmar made a mistake by coming to the U.S. He would have been better off not breaking the law in the first place. After he made the mistake, he could have tried to make things right by simply leaving on his own. This way, he would not have been sent to the terrorism confinement center. Ultimately, Kilmar probably does belong in El Salvador, but it is ridiculous for the country to place him in the terrorism confinement center, even for a short time. The United States should not be celebrating a country that is willing to violate human rights to any degree, much less in the egregious fashion El Salvador has selected. Those are my thoughts on the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.